Hello, everyone, and welcome to Capes, Cows, and Masks, the show where we uncover the world of soups and science fiction. I'm your host, Jake Hart. I'm a podcaster, a sound designer, and a writer for the Fresh Take Hub. And as always, I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts.
Hi everyone, it's Tom Gapper here, aspiring writer, podcaster, and your resident and beloved comic book shogun.
And I am David Osger. I am a multimedia journalist and also a podcaster.
What?
Really?
You never told me this. Who have you been podcasting with, Dave?
It's funny because I saw you retweet that meme that's been going around of like the two podcast hosts.
Yeah.
Like, one of them's all happy and the other one's all grumpy. And I was like, yeah, that basically sums up Well Good Movies in a nutshell.
Exactly. And I sent that to Craig and he was just like, okay, yes, but I'm not sure if I'm happy being compared to Nelson. And I was just like, and you think I'm happy being compared to Martin, you know? But he was like, yeah, but in universe, like nobody likes Nelson. And I was like, they don't like Martin. What are you on about?
That's very true. And I think it's quite common in most podcasts because I saw a lot of podcasts like retweet that and be like, yep, this is us. And
exactly.
Like,
so it's the same as that one that you saw of like, oh, you're a Star Wars fan? Tell me about your podcast.
I felt personally attacked. That one is, oh, you're a Star Wars fan in your 20s? What's your podcast called?
Yeah. There's just so much like dirt thrown at podcasters, which is like, we are the same. It's funny.
I don't understand where it comes from, though. I'm just like, is it just because it's so accessible now that everyone can do it that they're like throwing these jabs? I don't know.
It's been around for a few years. It's even been like, oh, you're like four friends who like talk shit with each other. Tell me about your podcast. Like even that's been around for quite a few years. So yeah.
Let's be honest, that there was probably many podcasts during the pandemic that started and probably burnt out. Hopefully some are still going.
Well, if we want to be balanced as well, I think probably if people wanted a more kind of modern equivalent, if you didn't want to be like, oh, you're some guys with a podcast, blah, 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 you know, you could easily be like, oh, you're like three women who like meet up every week. Tell me about your true crime podcast. That could probably be the equivalent in that sense, rather than Star Wars or nerd
It's very
stuff.
true. And me and my girlfriend, we are the prime examples. I'm a guy in my 20s talking about Star Wars on a podcast, and she is in her 20s absolutely digging into true crime and even taking up a course in true crime now. So it's just like,
there you go.
we are the prime examples of this. But yeah, we're back with this show. Very excited. Our first sort of proper show of 2022 with a new series. We'll talk about that in a second. But how are you guys? How have you been? What are you watching? What are you getting up to?
Oh, God. Watching and reading way too many things at the moment. Like so many things I'm struggling to keep hold of it. I've been catching up on Witcher Season 2.
More on that later.
Yeah, which has been good so far. But yeah, there'll be more on that later, courtesy of Jake. I've been reading a lot. As, again, you'll be finding out a bit more later what I've been reading. But as well as that, I've just been like trying to catch up on some DC and Marvel solicitations that I'm like a bit behind on. And yeah, just been diving headfirst into video games. I've actually started The Witcher 2 because I've been getting into The Witcher and you've been getting into The Witcher. So I was like, I have it. I may as well play it. So yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Nice. And Dave, how about yourself? I know you've been quite busy as of late.
Yeah, it's kind of like similar to a lot of last year, but then busy for like different reasons. But I guess that again has meant that I'm kind of digging into and catching up in a lot of the stuff that's kind of like easy digestible content. Like with Disney Plus, I've been trying to sort of like finish off a lot of the things that I started. So I've kind of gone back to the Marvel Studios assembled features that they've had to try and sort of complete that. Also the Marvel 616, because I kind of never finished that. I kind of started with the Spider-Man one, but never went back. So I just finished the female comic book artists, writers episode. And yeah, apart from that, it's kind of like the easy kind of fun sitcom-y stuff that sometimes I'll put on just to kind of like wind down and all that kind of stuff. And something kind of similar, I suppose, to what I'm talking about today is Disney's Dinosaurs, you know, that weird comedy sitcom from the 90s, which has kind of like a relevance to what I'm talking about today. But yeah, and then also in terms of like other sitcoms and stuff like that, I started watching Superstore on Netflix as a kind of like, I'll just chuck this on for when I'm doing dishes or something like that, and then got really engrossed and kind of loving it as well. I'm like, this show goes really dark, like has some quite dark humor in it, which I respect. So yeah, I ended up that's kind of sometimes gets me through my lunch breaks at work, etc.
I did watch Encanto recently for the first time.
We don't talk about Bruno. No,
I feel like we should. I liked Bruno. Bruno
we
was
should
great.
talk about. He was the MVP of that. Did you see that it hit #1 on the top 100 Billboard now?
It's crazy.
I did shake because I sensed that in the chat.
Oh yes, of course you did. I've seen it online, so I forgot who sent it to me. So
Yeah, no, that does happen a lot with us, though. To be fair, but yeah, no, that's like wild, though. I think it's like Disney's first #1 in like
it's in 29
years.
years. Yeah. But for this episode, let's get into it, boys. This is a first episode in a new series titled From the Source. This is where every 2 months, we'll each bring to the table a certain book, comic, or any other form of media that was originally one thing and then adapted to the screen. We're going to talk about the source and then discuss its adaptation, or, in Tom's case, soon-to-be adaptation. Tom, let's start with you, our comic book shogun. So naturally, you're going to come in with a comic, and might say one of the biggest comics ever to arrive.
Yes, so very excited to give the first from the source material. That we'll figure out.
We'll work on that. Yeah.
We'll work on it. We'll workshop it. But yeah, I'm going to be bringing to the table Fantastic Four issues 1 through to 50 from the incomparable Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. So I've been diving into some of the like original Marvel stuff, been picking up a lot of like Ditko Spider-Man and the original like Avengers run and the original Incredible Hulk. And I was excited to do the Fantastic Four because I have always loved the Fantastic Four. And whilst, you know, I've read some of the seminal stories from that time, there was like, I've not gone through and read it issue by issue. So I was very excited. And there's so many wonderful things I can say about this series. One highlight is, for me, the art. I mean, it's Jack Kirby. I wish I could show you, the listeners. Just go on Google and type in Jack Kirby art. It's just wonderful what that man is able to do. And what he was able to do was so different to what people were doing at the time. You have to understand, comics used to appear quite static. I know that sounds silly because it is a static medium. You know, it's you're not watching a fucking television show. But like when you're seeing like Superman flying, you're just seeing image by image Superman like flying and then like landing, and it's all very still. Jack Kirby knew how to like show movement and make you actually feel like you were struggling along with the characters almost. Great example of this is during the Coming of Galactus arc, where the Thing is taking on what's known as the Punisher. It's not that Punisher. It's a robot thing that Galactus has. And you can actually like feel the struggle that the Thing is having, like fighting this weird robot. And you've seen the Thing at this point fight the Hulk 2 or 3 times. So it's just the fact that Kirby's art is and always will be a highlight of anything you will read comics wise. So I'm just going to shout that out first and foremost. The wonderful thing about this series, though, is just all the world building it does for the Marvel Universe going forwards. You've got the first appearance of so many like big important players. You've got the first appearance of Namor within the Marvel Universe. You've got the first appearance of the Inhumans, of Ramatut and Kang, and well, you got Doom. You got Doom, man. Dr. fucking Doom. One of the greatest villains of all time came from these fucking comics. And every issue is just delightful to read. It's a bit dated at times. Obviously, the writing for Sue isn't amazing. There are moments where like she does get to shine, and you can see that like at the time they were trying to do something, but obviously they were hampered with like how women were written by the time, and the fact that these are a bunch of guys writing this woman. So it fell flat a lot of the times, but Sue still comes across as quite a strong character when she's allowed to be. Thankfully, her character has been handled a lot better, especially in recent years. But this is something you have to be aware of going into these series, is that like Reed sometimes comes across as a bit of a prick. which will come as a shock to absolutely no one. But it's that whole family dynamic, which is because individually these characters had been done before. Like Reed Richards, like you had Plastic Man at DC. They had like characters like who could turn into fire and go. All these characters had been done before. There was a previous Human Torch at Marvel, completely unrelated to this one. But what made them unique was this family dynamic. They're a group of scientific explorers who just like all got turned into these fantastic like marvels, and they just do science shit and help people, and it's just amazing. And you see the family dynamics when they fight, when they argue. The Thing is constantly arguing with everyone because he has the roughest deal. And like what surprised me actually reading through these was all the times that there were so many issues where basically like the Thing would temporarily become Ben Grimm again, and he'd lose his rocks, and it would be like, oh my god, I'm back to normal. Then by the end of the issue, they'd all start growing again. And every single time, and this is again a testament to Kirby's art, it was just drawn so beautifully. The despair, the anguish, you really get a feel for what Ben was going through and like why he is like such an angry and like abrasive person. Although what is hilarious is the entire reason Ben went into space, the entire reason they all got their powers was because originally Ben didn't want to fly the ship up there. He was like, you haven't done proper testing, Reed. I'm not just going to go up there and do that. And Sue calls him a coward and basically says, like, if you, you're going to let the commies win. And then in that moment, Ben Grimm is like, what? No! Fuck it. We're getting in that spaceship. We're going right fucking now. Fuck those commies. And I think that's beautiful, to be honest. Again, there's some really weirdly written issues. Like one of the weirdest is this one where there's this villain called the Hate Monger. And like it's built up at the start with in classic Stan Lee fashion of going like, this is the most thought-provoking comic book you'll ever read. And they're fighting against this guy called the Hate Monger, who is making people just turn to hate and get into like angry, violent mobs. And they defeat him. And at the end, they take off the guy's helmet, and it's a Hitler clone. It is a Hitler clone. Just sat right there. It's weird as shit, but you know what? It works because it's the Fantastic Four. Some highlights, particular favorites. So there's an issue where they're dealing with some Skrulls on Earth, and after defeating them, they've got to figure out what to do with these Skrulls. These Skrulls don't want to go home. They were quite like happy on Earth, but they realized they can't live as Skrulls and they can't live as humans. So Reed comes up with a genius idea. He convinces them to shapeshift into cows, where he then has them hypnotized to believe that they have always been cows and that they are cows. So now there are 3 cows living on Earth that are actually Skrulls. That is fucking hilarious to me. The fact that there are these just 3 random cows that at any given moment could just remember, hang on a minute, I'm an alien warlord. What am I doing here? Eating grass and shitting all over the place. Another highlight of an issue, and I really want everyone to read these 2 issues because like they are so fucking good, is issues 39 and 40. And it's a pair of issues that features Daredevil. The first one is entitled A Blind Man Will Lead Them. The cover art is like fantastic. I want it as a poster on my wall. But just over the old 2 issues, it's basically Daredevil helping the Fantastic Four who have lost their powers fight Doom. And you actually get a few pages of Doom and Daredevil going hand to hand themselves and bantering at each other. And it's fucking incredible. And again, this is just like more of the world building because like throughout it, you see Reed's just like watching Daredevil fight. And he's just like, how can this man do all this shit? This is like insane. And this is coming from a guy who can like stretch his arm like around fucking buildings. What else can I talk about? Oh yeah. Oddly enough, in these early issues, Sandman appears more as a Fantastic Four villain than he does as a Spider-Man villain. There's a lot. Like I knew he appeared in the like original, what were they called? Fatal Four, Fearsome Four, whatever. But there is it was like 5 or 6 issues where he kept showing up and was fucking with the Fantastic Four, and I was like, do are these just your enemies now? Do you not give a shit about Spider-Man? I mean, I'm okay with it because like it's quite a fun matchup seeing him go up against the Fantastic Four. But yeah, and also seeing Medusa originally as a villain to them was fun, and seeing how the Inhumans were introduced. And yeah, of course, just going through the whole series, I was just falling in love with the characters again, learning new things about them, seeing things that have been like referenced by writers in the future, by like Hickman or by Wade, and just being like, oh, so that's where that comes from, or that's where that first started, that's why that line's important. And then culminating in just rereading one of my favorite arcs of all time, which is the Coming of Galactus, which it can't really be understated how like important that comic was in terms of like the story building in Marvel, because it wasn't just like here's this big bad alien overlord who wants to take over the world. It wasn't like, oh, here's this big bad villain who wants to destroy things because he's like so evil. This was a being that ate planets because that's just what it does, and that's just how it operates and needs to live. It is because it must be. It's not like there's really, realistically, nothing they could have done about it. So the fact that they were able to end up winning with the help of someone who's famous for not interfering, the Watcher, is just amazing to see. And just like seeing like these two huge beings, the Watcher and Galactus, just arguing with each other over the streets of Manhattan whilst the Fantastic Four are down there just like, what do we do about this? So many times, like Ben is just like, I don't know, I'll punch Galactus. Reed, that didn't work. What do we do now? Have you tried hitting him with fire? Yeah, we tried that. Nothing's working. This is just. But yeah, you get some great Johnny Storm moments in that actually, because the Watcher sends him on a quest to go and get the ultimate nullifier so that Reed can hopefully defeat Galactus. It's just got everything. The entire run has everything, and I'm looking forward to continuing this run past issue 50. I know in 2 issues time I've got the first appearance of Black Panther coming up, so I'm definitely looking forward to checking out that. But yeah, there's really just like so much to dive into in these first 50 issues. I'm not sure if I could. I've barely touched upon it all, really. Like I was looking through a list earlier because I was like, I wonder if I could just list all the firsts that were introduced in it. It would honestly take me too long to go through every single first that they brought in and to talk about like these characters and their relationships and just seeing them in their base form as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby intended, and just what's sprung from them, and just seeing how like that evolution has come along. It's been like a wonderful journey, and I've been getting the same feeling from Spider-Man as well. I just love these comics, man. So yeah, that's issues 1 to 50 of Fantastic Four. I probably could have gone on for so much longer, but honestly, like, I want to give you guys a chance to talk.
I mean, you pretty much covered everything, and as you said, probably only really the tip of everything that was introduced in those first 50 issues. Yeah, it's Marvel's first family. Do you know what I mean? And it basically, as you said, established the Marvel universe going forward. I have fond memories of this run, not the full 50 issues. I had, when I was younger, like this big sort of omnibus trade paperback, a really old tatty one that had the first 34 issues in it. I've still got it somewhere. And I just remember loving it. It was one of the first Marvel comics I read, and the reason I was attracted to it was because I was a big fan of monsters as a kid, dinosaurs and monsters and all sorts of things. And what I saw from Fantastic Four was these scientists who were turned into monsters, essentially, and they're fighting other monsters for the good of mankind, sort of thing. So that's what really attracted me to them initially, like on a surface level. And then when you get on deep and you find out it's a true family story, it's all about the relationships between these lot. It's just so much to love about it. It's a monster family, I guess. Dave, what do you think of Fantastic Four? These like first sort of, have you ever read these original issues by Lee and Kirby?
No, it's more like the kind of Spider-Man that I've gone back to. Obviously, I know the kind of like iconography of them, and when looking at kind of comic history and stuff, it is always like, oh, first appeared in Fantastic Four, and so you very much see how the origins and of Marvel came very much from these comics. And I've always kind of been intrigued by that. There wasn't a kind of Superman, Batman approach of like everyone clung to these singular characters. I've always found it interesting that the kind of like the family unit of kind of oddball, strange, powered characters are the ones that were kind of like the first family, the things that triggered everything off, which I think is interesting, but maybe speaks to the kind of era that they were introduced in, which very much like Batman, Superman were introduced at very different times in terms of like war or detective stories being very popular, whereas this kind of like tapped into the kind of interest people had in like science and that kind of stuff, which definitely taps into like other stuff we'll be discussing today.
Let's talk about the adaptations of like guys, if you want to hear mine and Dave's thoughts, last year or even maybe almost 2 years ago now, we did a whole episode about those Fantastic Four movies, so I don't think we'll get too deep into it. But Tom, are you probably in the same wavelength as most people that the Fantastic Four have not had their due on the big screen with four attempts at movies?
Yeah, I mean the Roger Corman one. That's
probably the best of the lot. Let's not kid ourselves.
Some way. Like the thing from like the 2000s one, and then Fan Four Stick. With the 2000s one, it had its moments. It had some aspects I liked. I did like.
Let's go for a spin.
I didn't like that. I quite like Chris Evans as Johnny. I thought he actually exuded a lot of Johnny energy. I liked how I thought Michael Chiklis as the Thing was great. I thought that was actually inspired casting. And for the time, it looked great as well, in my opinion. But yeah, those films really were not a good adaptation of the Fantastic Four. The Doom especially. I remember being very pissed off with the Doom. Then Fan Four Stick came along, and I thought to myself, maybe I'll see a Doom that I actually like. Maybe I'll see. No! Oh my god! That fucking film is the worst piece of fucking trash I've ever seen. Oh my god, I hate it so much. And that Doom is not Doom. That Doom is not Doom in any way, shape, or form. I refuse to recognize his Doom ship. It is not Doom. I just hate that movie so goddamn much. It is the worst adaptation of any comic book property ever, and I'm including everything. I'm including Howard the Duck. I'm including the 70s Doctor Strange. I'm fuck this movie.
You know what?
I hate it.
I would, because I was thinking about this in preparation for this show. Like, is that the worst comic book movie? And I was thinking about other really bad comic book movies like Catwoman and all that sort of thing. But then I think about, no, at least Catwoman knows what it is. Like, this just fails on every level, unfortunately. But that's out the way. We're excited for the MCU. What do you think?
Well, I mean, like, I have no idea sort of like what direction they're going to be taking with it. There's multiple avenues they could go down. They could do the classic origin story if they're in space, they get hit by cosmic rays. They could do the ultimate version. I have them go to the negative zone, although that might invoke too much Fan Four Stick, and so maybe they'll stay away from that. But I'm just interested to hear any and all news on this. I want to know who's cast. I want to know like what's happening, who's directing it. Oh, we know who's directing. One of us, John Watts. I'm happy with that.
Oh yeah.
We'll see. Mostly, I just want them to confirm for my own sanity that Doom will get a solo movie. I feel like Doom needs a solo movie. I want it. Wait, no. Doom needs a Disney Plus series. He needs that long. You need long. Give me
with
Doom.
Noah Hawley running that shit.
Yes, bring that back, because I really wanted that Noah Hawley Doom movie. I really, really wanted it so badly, and I was so angry that it got taken away from me. But yeah, I think we've discussed on the show before. I think like I don't want Doom as the villain straight away. You could maybe get away with having a mention of him in like a post-credit scene. But like I say, don't even show us Doom in that first Fantastic Four movie. Get one mention of Latveria or a Doom, and that's it. I mean, there's some rumors that he may be introduced like in a post-credit scene in Black Panther 2. I wouldn't be like I kind of want them to just build up Doom before actually like make the audience like truly fear him before bringing him on. And so then like when he does appear and it is like go time and it is Fantastic Four versus Doom, you're like, okay, I understand the stakes are fucking high right now. Because especially because the last two adaptations have been so trash for him, the like general audience members who remember that and like aren't into comic book media, they're probably just going to be, they might look on it unfavorably. So if you build him up and really go like, yeah, this is someone to be fucking feared. Yeah, so I just hope they don't jump the gun too quickly. Maybe give us Mole Man for the first film as the villain.
I'd be happy with that. Mole Man would be great. Or Sandman.
Or
Instead of Spider-Man then. Yeah, no, I'm pretty much on board with you. Everything you said. I don't want Doom for the first movie. Let's build up to Doom. If anything, I'll take a reference to Latveria or something like that. But I really just kind of want. This might sound boring, but I think it deserves to be put onto screen. I think they just need to adapt those first like 5 issues. Do you know what I mean? I think just go old school. Just say it was in the 60s, they got trapped, and now they're back in modern time. Do you know what I mean? Just do the story, but just slight changes to make it work for the MCU. Because I think that is a perfect story, as we've just discussed, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby. We know Feige's a big fan of the Fantastic Four. You can see that when he ever brings them up. He's very excited to bring the Fantastic Four into the MCU. Just do the classic, I say. Don't try anything different. Don't try anything fancy. Just go with what's already been done in a way. So that's all I really say in the matter. And John Watts, I don't know. I'll be interested to know, because they haven't announced who's writing it, have they? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
So I'll be interested to see who's writing the script. I think John Watts is a fine director, but nothing about his directorial stuff wows me in particular for a Fantastic Four project. As you've heard on my thoughts on some of the Spider-Man films he's directed. But Dave, what are your thoughts? Are you excited for the prospect of the Fantastic Four in the MCU?
I am, and I'm not. I think that I have been excited for them to come in, and I think they make a lot more sense than like the X-Men to come into the MCU. And like you, I think I've suggested before in terms of kind of paying homage to that legacy of being like from the 60s, etc. I think that would be fun if they came into it as the first family. Rightfully, I really don't want it to be this kind of like, they're a part of the developing superheroes of the world since Iron Man started. They've then got their powers years later. I just think that would be like a disservice to the characters almost if they just came into it kind of like randomly. I think you kind of just have to have some kind of legacy there to justify them being there almost. It just would be weird that they would be like, oh, why should we trust these, 4 randomly powered superheroes, like we said, because they're such a random and strange power set, and they're so linked to that time of science in the 60s and science fiction. Like, honor that in some ways, especially the fact that we've used Captain Marvel, Captain America, and they've had their kind of like eras represented. So why not do the same with the Fantastic Four? But yeah, I just really am not confident in John Watts, unfortunately. I think at one point it was like speculated that Peyton Reed was also interested, and that also to me was like the wrong choice. So then to go with John Watts, I'm like, why are we going with like all like sort of, to me, the most comedic directors of the MCU? And like you, Jake, I just have not seen anything like from him that would give me faith in that. Maybe, I guess, in the sense that the Spider-Man, at least the first 2 ones, were very dedicated to that kind of like teen 80s movie vibe. So potentially he could go like, right, let's go with this kind of 60s zany sci-fi vibe. But I've still not seen anything particularly visually strong from him. Like, heck, I would, even though people are not as fussed on the film or the directors, I would be happier with the directors of Captain Marvel taking over, because I think that they still had enough like references and knowledge of the character in that film and kind of give it somewhat of its own tone, and they can still bring in that like female element because they're like a duo to like Sue. But yeah, I just don't think that John Watts to me screams anything visually exciting about his action, or in terms of like his writing and stuff as well, because that was so many of my issues with the new Spider-Man film was like the comedy and stuff like that, and I really don't want that to be part of the Fantastic Four. So there's just nothing really to get me excited in the sense of like, ooh, a Sam Raimi Doctor Strange film. There's nothing about a John Watts Fantastic Four film that gets me hyped. And I don't know, I think in the future a lot of people could come back to this podcast ever, or come back to me like, Dave, you were right. You know, I don't want to be right, but I just can't see, like, I don't know why. There's been so many other times where, say, Rian Johnson, for example, of like, you know, when Looper came out, people were like, oh, give him like a big movie, or somebody like what's his name,
Gareth
Edwards.
Yeah,
like people have like, you know, give him this, give him that, and you know, like come out with mixed results potentially, but you know, they were a big hot name at that time. John Watts to me just isn't that, because he hasn't come out with any kind of anything like experimental or bold or new or different. He kind of has like gone along with what Marvel has wanted and done something very formulaic, even though he did have the teen 80s aspect to those original Spider-Man films. I just have not seen anything that would kind of suggest that, obviously not that he would take that approach with the Fantastic Four, but I just can't see anything like unique that he's added to the action, etc. Say like Far From Home, like the Mysterio sequence. People love that sequence. Nothing about that to me screamed, oh, John Watts is really like thriving in this environment. Someone like Ryan Coogler, you can see a lot of the director coming through in his material. You can see those kind of like scenes where he goes to like the tree and stuff like that, and the ending of the film. All of that is kind of like Ryan Coogler coming through in his work. I've not seen that with John Watts. I don't see that Mysterio scene and go like, oh, this is John Watts unhinged. I just see that as like Marvel going like, oh, let's do this crazy VFX thing with Mysterio playing with Spider-Man, and the kind of VFX team were more responsible for that than John Watts.
Yeah, I'm probably a bit more optimistic than you, David, but I still have similar concerns to you. Nevertheless, the prospect of getting Fantastic Four in the MCU is just very exciting for me, because they need to be there. Any final words on Fantastic Four, apart from people should read it?
They're fantastic.
Yeah.
Also, on the future, I would just quickly say that you could easily bring in Kang, because we know he's in the MCU, he's coming, and also the Super Skrull, if you wanted to do a first villain, like you guys were saying about.
Well, the thing is, the Skrulls are coming,
yeah,
Kang's coming, exactly. And after watching Eternals, a certain other big thing, cosmic entity might be coming down the line, but we'll see.
And a shiny one.
Yes, and a shiny one on a surfboard.
If I had any final things to say, I just say read the comics, people. Read
the
them.
comics.
Read them all.
I think you can get it in like an omnibus, like a nice hardcover omnibus.
You could definitely get like a couple of those. Yeah.
It'll set you back a few pennies, but hey,
just a bit, but worth it.
All right then. So that's Fantastic Four. We'll get on to my pick next, and my pick is the fantasy series The Witcher. The author is Andrzej Sapkowski, a Polish author. And the reason I brought this one to the table is we've seen, obviously, the season 2 of the Netflix series come out recently in December. It's been talked about, probably not as talked about much as season 1, but it is on the webs and people are talking about it. And there's a big push for fantasy now with the Lord of the Rings of Power coming out, the Wheel of Time's been coming out, and all these sorts of things. So I thought, I haven't had a good fantasy series to dive into. I've just watched the show, and I thought I'm going to go into the books. And they've quickly become probably... I still need to finish the whole series, and that's my caveat here, is that I have not finished all the book series yet. I am on book 3 out of the 5 in the main saga, and I've read 2 of 3 of the short story books, and standalone novels and stuff like that. But it has quickly risen to one of my favorite fantasy worlds, high fantasy. And, just behind Tolkien, I just think Tolkien's created what we think of now as modern fantasy. It's hard to trump him, especially the legacy he left behind with language and characters and world building and all of that. But I think for me personally, Andrzej Sapkowski gets a lot right on what a high fantasy series should be like. Like it follows, as in the title, this Witcher called Geralt of Rivia, who's essentially a monster hunter. And what I love about this series is that when you look at something like Tolkien, which is all out fantasy, that he avoids any allegory for real world situations and things like that. It is purely fantasy. He wants you to escape into this world he's created. And then you look at the other big fantasy worlds, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, and that show Game of Thrones, where it is set in a fantasy world, but it is very heavy on the politics and real world situations. And, it is talking in a way about real life history and how we've done humankind and stuff like that, with dragons thrown in there, but it's primarily politics. I think The Witcher has this really fine balance of monster hunting and all the fantasy elements that you would expect, but also a lot of politics and human emotions in this story. And I think, I'll briefly talk about the world, because it's not like a huge series that everyone's aware of unless you've watched the show. And even the show is like cutting corners, because that's what a show does, because it doesn't have the time to tell the story. But I just think it's so rich. Like it's set in this world called a continent, and it's divided between like northern kingdoms, and like in the south there's a Nilfgaardian empire that throughout the course of the books, like they're taking over the northern kingdoms. There's this big war going on. And then you have, in the middle of that, Geralt of Rivia, who is the Witcher, and he has this journey with a girl called Princess Cyril of Cintra. Cintra is like a kingdom where she is like a child of destiny. And it's very typical chosen one sort of prophecy. She is the one sort of thing, but with a unique twist to it. And that's what I love about this series. It's fantasy and everything you would expect, but it just has unique twist to it, and makes it unique in this world of fantasy that can be quite generic at times. Like the magic and monsters of it all as well. Like, I love that Andrzej Sapkowski was actually a traveling salesman before he went on to become a full-time author. And on his business trips and that, he took inspiration from traveling through Europe and learnt stories, heard poems and folk tales about old monsters, primarily in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, collecting it all together, but making it universal in a way that we all recognize this monster in some way. We just have a different name for it depending on the culture or background you come from. And the way he also twists how we view typical fantasy stuff with elves and dwarves and halflings and wizards and all of that. Like, wizards are not just these all-powerful beings that this the mystical, there's a science behind the magic, and there's a classist aspect behind the magic, and a political aspect behind the magic as well, and how it's used politically. It's just a really, really rich world. It's full of kikimoras and werewolves and vampires, but at the same time, I think it sacrifices tits and dragons, as you would say for Game of Thrones, for real human emotion and real storytelling. And it's cool, all the monsters and stuff, but really it's the central themes of this. One of them that keeps on popping up, which is sort of combined, which I love, is the lesser evil in this world. And it makes me think about what we're going through in our real world, and we're always choosing between that shit or this is another shit option. And these books really explore what is the lesser evil. And Geralt has this view of neutrality, of evil is evil. There is no lesser, no matter what you think of it. But then as humans, we have to sometimes decide between a lesser evil, the worst, the best of a shit situation, you could say. And it really goes into depth into that, into neutrality, the morally gray. What we would think is fair and good might actually stab you in the back. And then how it portrays monsters as well as like, oh, these are beasts and they must be killed. And even Geralt the Witcher, who is a mutant in this world, is hated by the public, even though he does them favors by killing all these monsters because he's different. So there's big themes of discrimination in here as well, and prejudice. Obviously, destiny versus choice, which is a big theme that I like, that you have in Star Wars and The Matrix and most fantasy sci-fi, like the One Prophecy type things. And then you've obviously got all the politics and war and all of that stuff. So it's a really good world to jump into. And like one of my favorite things about it is it's just a small thing. It's called the Law of Surprise. And it's just this cool little world building thing where I've never seen before, where they say, oh, how do I pay you for this task? And he's like, oh, I claim the Law of Surprise. So whenever you go home, the thing that you see there that you weren't expecting, that is what you'll pay me. And it's just so cool. And it's just interesting world building. Do you know what I mean? And Andrzej Sapkowski is a master at world building. He gives you such detail about the kingdoms, the geography, the layout of it. But he's also cleverly never really officially drawn a map of the kingdom, because he's like, I like the story to unfold, so I don't want to restrict myself to a certain geography of it. But he paints a beautiful picture of this world, of sort of Eastern Europe, you could say, medieval times. And then we'll talk about the show in a minute. I just think if someone is like, I need something fantasy to read and something that's just a bit different to the generic fantasy stuff that we're used to, The Witcher is a wonderful series to dive into. And it's just full of politics, magic, blood, violence, but a lot of heart and human emotion as well. So that's my pick, is the Witcher franchise. You guys, you haven't read the books. I know you guys haven't read the books. You're aware of the show, but like, Tom, I'll go to you first. Was your introduction to The Witcher through the games? Because I know like that was actually my introduction to The Witcher, because years ago I hadn't played the games, but I heard about this game, The Witcher 3 primarily, because it was just talked about everywhere, how big of a success it was. But I didn't pay attention into this franchise until I got into the Netflix show. But was your entrance to games?
I mean, it's pretty much the same as you, to be honest. It was just like I'd heard of The Witcher through like everyone talking about this game, The Witcher 3. And I think like my mate ended up like buying it shortly after it came out. And like I remember just watching him play it. And I just remember at the time just like hearing about this like global phenomenon that was The Witcher 3, and just being like, I didn't realize there was a Witcher 1 and 2, to be honest with you. This is all news to me. And yeah, I played through The Witcher 3, and I did really enjoy it. But then when the Netflix show came out, then that was when that's kind of when it grabbed me. Like initially when the first season came out, I remember watching it and being like, okay, I like this, but I don't know if I like it. I don't know if it's quite grabbing me yet. But then I started rewatching it recently, went through the entirety of season 1, and I was like, okay, no, I think I maybe judged this a bit wrong last time. I actually really, really enjoyed it. And I've actually found myself like wanting to get more into this world now. Like I'm a bit into season 2. I've started like playing The Witcher 2 as well, and I'm already considering like getting all the books and stuff, because I do want to dive into this world. It does seem like a very rich, unique world, because I do love my fantasy worlds, but I do like them to have like just a twist on all the normal tropes, because we know all the tropes. We've seen them all a million times before. And
don't get me wrong, there are still certain fantasy tropes but I think that's a bit unfair on the author, because it's some of those tropes that you just can't get out of when you're writing fantasy.
Exactly. So yeah, I'd definitely be interested in reading the books, because well, they're so highly regarded, and yeah, I'm going to be enjoying going through the Witcher games again, and enjoying finishing season 2, because I have been enjoying it so far. I know some people have had some criticisms of it, but I'm just, as I haven't read the books yet, I'm just enjoying this for what it is. Watching a very handsome man kill a shit ton of monsters.
He's very, very handsome man, Superman. Dave, what before we get into like the show itself, what do you think of like the world of The Witcher? Because I know you're not really familiar with it, are you yet?
Yeah, it's like similar to Tom. I think when the show came out, I was kind of like, oh, it's like an adaptation of a video game. That's cool. And then it was like Henry Cavill talking about it. And I was like, oh, right, this was actually a book series. I didn't know. And it's kind of interesting that a game was adapted from books, which you don't really hear of all that much because games, I guess, are kind of always like original ideas in a way so that they can kind of have free reign. So, yeah, I wasn't as interested in as a video game because it kind of seemed to me like that kind of God of War, Prince of Persia, all of that kind of stuff, like Assassin's Creed. It kind of just all like melded together into just these big expansive world games. But when the TV series came out, I was more intrigued by the fantasy elements of it, of exploring this new world. I checked out like the first few episodes, and it's just one of those that I've unfortunately never been able, just haven't had a chance to go back to, but I've intended to ever since. But I did kind of like the aspects of like, it's something with a bit of a twist. It's something different. It's got like its lore and its like rules, which I think is important to like a fantasy series. And yeah, I'm definitely intrigued, especially by your description of like, it's politics with fantasy and, like magic, but, with heart and stuff like that, which like seems to tick a lot of the boxes. And it's just ironic, I suppose, because me and Tom were talking about the other day, and we've just said here about like that conventional fantasy. I think it is just very important that you don't have that kind of like, oh, there's the 4 tribes and like, oh, there's like all these people have like the elements and like this man wears red, these people wear green, and that can just become very stale, very boring. And I think it's kind of interesting in that sense. So that's what appeals to me about The Witcher, is like, how are they doing this? How are they doing that? It's not just a kind of like, oh, it's just all these places are divided and they have these powers and they have these. It's just a conventional way of doing things. So it's good when they can mix it up.
Yeah, it just twists it and just subverts your expectations in a way of what a fantasy series should be like. And when in regards to the Netflix show, as I said, it was sort of the thing that brought me into this world. Now, I watched season 1 when that came out, and I had similar reactions to Tom. I was like, okay, I like a lot of elements here, but I felt narratively like it was a bit all over the place. They were hopping between time jumps, not even telling you. They were just sort of like, we're here, like 30 years later or whatever. So I was like, okay, there's a lot of great stuff in here, but nothing that's hooking me. And it wasn't until season 2 was coming out, I was like, okay, I'm going to rewatch it. And I had a much better experience with it after learning a bit more about the lore and where these stories take place. I was enjoying the series a lot more. Season 2 comes along. I was enjoying that. And I was like, right, that's it. I'm going to buy the books. And before I go into maybe my criticisms now that I've read the books, I think it's one of Netflix's biggest shows in terms of production value, I think. Because when you look at the show, the production quality is really high. Like, the costumes look really well done. The wigs, that always pops up in our conversations. How do they look? They're always really dodgy in like TV shows and stuff like that. We see Henry Cavill with that white wig, and I'm just like, yeah, that's his hair. Do you know what I mean? And all the beards on the dwarves and everything. It gave me a Lord of the Rings vibe of like, we're not making costumes here. We're making real life attire that was worn in a history. Do you know what I mean? They're like replicating history rather than imagining fantasy with these costumes and stuff like that. And just like the sets and all that, the buildings and how they've constructed it to make it feel like Eastern Europe, like in Poland and stuff like that during medieval times, but also giving you the big fantasy elements with some really great CGI of like big towers and magical stuff and all of that. So I think production value and the cast are also killing it. It is spot on. Now that I've almost through the main saga of the books and gone past the point that the show has gone, I enjoy season 1 a bit more now than season 2. And it's nothing on, like I said, the production of the show or anything like that. It's more the writing and where they've taken the story. I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't watched the show or read the books. And just some of the character dynamics and relationships between them. It's just a bit like, okay, I understand changing it up a bit for the screen, but if it works for the screen, and I'm just thinking now that what were the changes? Because what I'm reading in the book could have worked on screen, personally. But those are just my criticism. I think you're always going to get that, though, whenever you adapt a book series to a film or a TV show. There's always going to be stuff that you cut out. Even though a TV show has the time to tell a longer story, it's still not a book length. Like a book length gives you so much time. And that's a great thing about the Witcher books, is that it's in no rush to tell the main story. It really takes its time. Like, you'll get 2 or 3 long chapters of like Geralt just walking through the wilderness and encountering people on the way. And it was, do you want to just do this side mission for me? You know, that sort of thing. So kind of like Mandalorian in a way. But yeah, it takes one. I just think the show seems in a bit of a rush. But Tom, what do you think of the show? You briefly spoke about it earlier, but
yeah, like I haven't finished season 2 yet, so I don't have like a full opinion on the show yet. But I have been really enjoying it. I do think that whilst like I said, the second time watching season 1, I appreciated it a lot more, and I was able to like place when things were happening a lot better. But I do would it have hurt them to have made it like a little bit more obvious, like when they were like jumping around, like where people were, like just occasionally just put up the name of a place and like the year it's in, like, you know. But yeah, I do agree with you. The production value is immense. It does look ridiculously good. I would totally believe that was just Henry Cavill's hair, that he just grew it out and dyed it white for the show. And yeah, like you said, like the fact that they made the costumes almost as if they were going like, right, we're going to make them as they would have been made back in history, and like not just focus on like cool fantasy designs. Looking at you, Wheel of Time. But yeah, I'm really excited for the rest of the season, and I'm excited for future seasons. I haven't read the books, but there have been some points where I have just been like, you've kind of rushed through some things here. But to be honest, can you really blame writers for a Netflix show for trying to rush through the plot when they don't know how many fucking seasons they're going to get?
There's that. I mean, we know there's a 3rd season happening. They've confirmed that. And, you know, if they're going by the books, they could easily go on for another probably 3, maybe 4 seasons. You know, me and Dave, we've spoken about Netflix before, and their maybe quick trigger finger to cancel shows. Like, what are your thoughts on the show itself? And like, do you think it has a future? Like, or do you think it could go the way of like most of the other Netflix shows?
It's hard to say with Netflix, because also we don't really have a metric of popularity apart from just the trending section and that kind of thing, or just like they'll go very much on like, are people talking about this? Is this a Stranger Things? Like, it's captured the zeitgeist, and you know, like everyone's referencing it and talking about it on social media, etc. So I think the first season had the benefit of having like the song and all of that kind of stuff like captured people's attention, whereas it doesn't seem to be anything from season 2 that have like captured people. So it is very much hard to say, especially depending on how much money they are spending on it. I think it would be a mistake to cancel it when you've put so much into it, when it is one of your big shows. And to me, especially because something like Umbrella Academy seems to like be continuing, I don't really see that much difference between the popularity of Umbrella Academy and The Witcher. Like, you know, when they're like, yeah, season 3, I'm like, cool. I didn't really hear that many people talking about season 2, but I really liked it, so I'm glad that it's carrying on. But I've not seen people there like, I need season 3 of Umbrella Academy right now. But I've not seen, you know, the same thing with The Witcher. But I think both of those shows add to the prestige of Netflix and give them something new and interesting, which can do a lot with their world. So yeah, why not? Like, you know, keep trying, keep building it. As long as Netflix is kind of bolstering what works for the visual medium, like you said, having those high production values. Like, something I liked about what I saw of it from the early ones is they did go all in, and you know, it did have those like big worlds. It's always so disappointing, as Tom said, with like things like Wheel of Time, in which you're like, oh yeah, this big fantasy world, and they're just like sat in the same set, or like they're in like shoddy costumes, etc. Whereas I definitely got the impression with The Witcher is like, they start off like boom, like big, like there's like wars, revenge, and betrayal, and all this kind of stuff is happening from the get-go, and like all this kind of like mystical stuff is happening from the very start, which you kind of have to respect.
It's great stuff. I hope Netflix stick to it, because the fantasy bug, I think, has caught Hollywood again. What with Amazon producing Wheel of Time, whether or not we agree with the quality, that's something else. Or the upcoming The Rings of Power. Obviously, Game of Thrones, I think, was the one that revitalized fantasy in Hollywood. And I think since that ended, every studio or streaming service is like, we need that. We need to get the next Game of Thrones.
A House of Dragons coming.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But unlike Henry Cavill's white wig,
oh God, they look so bad.
I'm not sure about Matt Smith in that blonde wig.
I love Matt Smith, but I'm gonna just be distracted that entire time. Just get that. But get it out.
But yeah, that's my pick, The Witcher. Watch the show on Netflix, pick up the books, read the comics, play the game. It's a whole world, big world to dive into. So many avenues to.
Not asking for much, are you, Jake? Bloody hell.
Hey, I didn't say do it all. I said jump into.
That was clearly implied.
Right, so from my world of monsters, let's move on to Dave's world of. It seems to be like, because we had the Fantastic Fours, monsters seems to be the theme of this week. So Dave, what have you got? What have you brought us?
I'm glad you made that connection, because I was struggling at first. I was just like, right, going from like this beloved, like rich world universe to some really dumb, stupid movies.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I've gone down kind of like the pop culture sort of movie route. So for me, I wanted to go through like the Godzilla films. As long-time listeners might know, when we kind of go through our catch-ups and stuff, there was an era during last summer in which I was talking about watching some of these like crazy Japanese original Godzilla films. And while I'm still going through all of them, I think it's a great chance to sort of talk about my experiences that I've had so far, and talk about how that has kind of like mirrored and been adapted into then some of the newer adaptations we've had of Godzilla, especially into like the MonsterVerse. For anybody who is a fan of the Roland Emmerich film, I'm sorry, I will not be talking about that film. So, but this is a franchise that started back in 1954 with the original Godzilla, which was directed by Ishiro Honda. This franchise as a whole is something that has been adapted in pop culture in many different ways: television, music, literature, video games. So Godzilla and kaiju stuff has kind of dominated and taken over a lot of mediums, and I think that that's what's really cool about it. So even though while the quality isn't always there, there's definitely a lot to say about the kind of appeal and how it's kind of like lapsed into different eras, into different parts of media. So for people who are like into the Godzilla kind of lore, you can kind of break it down into the different eras that they've had with the films as well. So there's the Showa era, which was from 1954 to 1975, which was based on the Emperor of Japan at that time, which is why it's called the Showa era. They then had the Heisei era, which was from 84 to 95. And then they had the Millennium era, which was from 99 to 2004. And at the moment, they are in the Reiwa era, which mainly is the Shin Godzilla film, but also has had some anime sequels, if you want to call it that, which have been on Netflix, ironically, when we were talking about that, or coincidentally, I should say. And then we've had the American films. So we had the Emmerich Godzilla, and then recently we've had the Legendary Pictures MonsterVerse, which is Godzilla from 2014, Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019, and Godzilla vs. Kong from 2021. So if you look back at the Godzilla history, like a big part of the reason I wanted to go back and watch all of these movies is to know where these different monsters come from. That idea of being like Mothra versus Godzilla, Rodan, King Ghidorah, like they're so iconic, and they've appeared so many times within different television shows and movies and that kind of stuff. I just wanted to see where that comes from. And people might know from where I've talked about before, I just love the kind of zany and crazy kooky stuff you sometimes get. I like physical things, very much like puppetry and that kind of stuff. I love like the Dark Crystal and like Muppets and stuff like that. Like, so here you're getting rubber suits, you're getting like a giant moth on a string, and you get like little models of trains and like somebody walking around in a big rubber suit, like trashing it. It's just very fun to look at in that sense. It's got a very much like almost like stop motion appeal of like, even if you're not enjoying the story, you can kind of just look at like the little details that they've at least had. Sometimes they're good, sometimes not so good. But if you're looking at like the first original Godzilla, the interesting thing about that, and I think a lot of people have said it, a friend of the show, Niall, who's been on before as well, has commented that it's interesting that they kind of did this kind of dark commentary on like nuclear warfare in the 1954 film and have just never gone back to that. It just turned ridiculous and stupid ever since. But in many ways, it almost feels as if they just can't, because like that film does it so well. It's a very kind of grim look at nuclear warfare. And what I've always like loved about that, and like Japan's approach to the Godzilla franchise and even other stories that they've done, is that this is clearly a country that has been affected and ravaged by its history. And you can see that in a lot of like stories that they do generally. If you look at like anime, if you look at like a film like Grave of the Fireflies, that's very much prominent there, is that they kind of carry their history on their shoulders. About they very much have this ethos of, we never want to do this again. We don't want to go to war. We've seen how like nuclear warfare has like ravaged our land and the world. And Godzilla very much is a commentary on that. There's very much, Japanese people are very linked to nature and kind of like, energy and spirits. And Godzilla like encapsulates a lot of that. So that original movie, you see like the horrors of what can be unleashed to humanity. So there's still very much like the, Godzilla represents like nature there in terms of like natural disasters, but also because there's like a man-made element to him as well. It's that kind of like warfare aspect. So what always stuck out to me in that original film is that you see like children crying in the streets, mothers like holding their babies and that kind of stuff, showing how this kind of like horrific acts can really impact on actual people, and seeing the devastation and destruction they cause. So even though while this series would later be guilty of it itself, and modern day adaptations of things like Transformers would be guilty of like, and let's just tear down an entire building or a city and who cares, there's no kind of aftermath of it. But this original film very much did approach that kind of like effect it has. And, they very much went with the aspect of like, one of the lead characters in that movie talks a lot about how they have created that monster. And his name is Dr. Daisuke Shirazawa, which was then they used that name partly in then the monster verse films we'll get onto later. So there he very much talks about how they've created this monster through nuclear testing, and it very much does become like a kind of disaster film. And they're thinking about the ways in which they have to destroy him and all this kind of stuff. And it does very much like turn into this kind of like dark destruction of like nature and of an animal, which I think is really impactful. But going after that, like I said earlier, it just goes into the crazy giant moths and like Godzilla versus this guy, Godzilla versus that guy. And obviously the most recent adaptation we've had is Godzilla versus Kong. And a lot of people might be familiar with the King Kong versus Godzilla, which was in 1962. And yeah, it's just hard not to kind of be encapsulated by the ridiculousness, by the kind of fact that like King Kong in that film, for example, is like at one point like airlifted into like a position to fight Godzilla. So he's just there on a bunch of balloons. And then the film like ends with them just kind of like awkwardly falling into the sea. And it's just ridiculous. You then have like Mothra versus Godzilla, which came after that. You had Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, Invasion of Astro Monster, Abira, Horror of the Deep, Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters Attack. it kept going, and then eventually it went to like Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and Terror of Mechagodzilla, which ended that original run. And that's where a lot of the kind of Godzilla lore has stemmed from ever since, and where we see references to even now in the MonsterVerse films. But in Invasion of Astro Monster, that very much is going with the kind of like, this is an era in which like space was huge. Kids loved aliens, UFOs, and it very much plays into the appeal of this film. And just the randomness of this. So I'll tell you just like the basic crux of the plot, which makes me like just find it bizarre. So essentially aliens like ask the humans for their help from the monster called Monster Zero, which is King Ghidorah. And they say to them, like, you've got Godzilla and Rodan. If you can like let us borrow them to get rid of Ghidorah, we'll give you the cure to cancer. I'm not joking. This is a plot in this film. The aliens offer them the cure to cancer in exchange for Godzilla and Rodan. So the humans agree. Like the aliens then come and just take Rodan and Godzilla in these like little bubbles and like transport them to their planet where they dump them. We then have like a very emotional scene in which Godzilla and Rodan are looking up at the humans leaving them behind. Like, no, why are you leaving us here? And then twist of the film, guys. The humans are given a disc, like literally just a CD, which is apparently the cure to cancer. They get home to Earth. Psych, it's not the cure to cancer. The aliens were tricking them all along. They were just like, yeah, thanks for giving us your only defense, which was Godzilla and Rodan. We now want your planet for its water. You are undefended. Thanks, guys. It is just completely bizarre, the fact that they bait them with the cure to cancer and it isn't. I'm like, what kind of twisted aliens are you? What the hell? And they literally take Godzilla and Rodan away from them. Eventually, thankfully, they manage to like disrupt their technology, and because the aliens actually control Godzilla, Rodan, etc. at one point. The humans then understandably snap them out of it. And then essentially Godzilla and Rodan then take it out on the aliens and they're killed and they escape and King Ghidorah flies off into space as well. But that's just an example of just the lunacy that these films go to. And that's capped off with ones like Destroy All Monsters and Attack All Monsters, in a film in which literally Godzilla and his mates are just kicking the shit out of Ghidorah. Like he's on the floor. They're all going to like pile on him and they're just like literally like kicking him on the floor. And that's why it has to be entertaining sometimes. And it's just interesting to see how that has evolved into some of the films you have now. Very much like with the Emmerich movie, there's not really much at all about Godzilla, which they carried on. But when you look at something like Godzilla, King of the Monsters, there is actually quite a bit of like reference and acknowledgement of those movies. And I think that is quite interesting. So do you guys have any experiences of these old movies? And do you think that they should be honored in this way? Or do you think, no, Godzilla should just be a badass?
I mean, I've seen like clips of the old films. I don't think I've ever sat down and like watched one of the old films in like its entirety. I definitely haven't seen the cancer bait one. I feel like I need to now. I'm actually tempted to like maybe dip into one or two of these because they sound like good fun. Because like at the end of the day, me like big monster fight smash, raw explosion. Like sometimes I do want something more from my films, and other times I just want pure unadulterated like violence and destruction, hitherto unknown, using big dinosaurs and giant gorillas. So these films sound great for that, and I think they absolutely should be honored in this way. Have there be a massive like that? That's what I love about these things. It's like on the surface, it's just like there's this big dinosaur that comes and just like breathes fire and destroys cities, and you're like but there's actually a lot of very complex lore behind it. So fuck you. I love shit like that. So yeah, they should totally honor them. And I haven't seen Kong versus Zilla yet. I'm quite behind on the new Godzilla films. I saw the first one with Bryan Cranston. I thought he was going to have a much bigger role in that film than he ended up getting. I was so hyped. I was like, oh my God, Bryan Cranston, Godzilla. And then it was like, Bryan Cranston. No, that didn't work. That was a shit joke. We'll cut that. But yeah, that's my experience on the films.
I was a big fan of Godzilla growing up. I couldn't tell you which ones I watched, Dave, but I did watch some of these weird Godzilla fighting Mothra and Rodan films when I was younger. Like, it was on Spanish telly, so it was dubbed in Spanish. Now, my Spanish is not as great as it should be, but I knew enough. But I was more interested in just seeing these monsters fight on screen as a kid. And unfortunately, I'm sorry, but I did really enjoy, not anymore, but at the time, I did enjoy the Roland Emmerich Godzilla film. Because, it's just, that's all I saw.
That's a lot of fish.
That's a lot of fish. As a kid, you love that stuff, and you love seeing big Godzilla and the army and all that. You get a kick out of it. Now, since I revisited, I was like, this is pretty awful. Yeah. But, and I eventually watched the original Godzilla film, and that's like, it's pretty much perfect as like a monster movie. Like, that set the foundation, the blueprint of what they all should be going forward, even though it's funny that other monster movies did that, except for the Godzilla franchise, as that just went in all sorts of directions. So yeah, I do have fond memories of watching these as a kid, but again, it's hazy, so I couldn't tell you which ones I watched. All I can tell you is that I like monsters fighting. And Godzilla's always been one of my favorite monsters. He's just iconic. As a guy who also loves sound and sound design, his roar is one of the most iconic sounds in cinema, I think. It's testament that they're still using that same roar from 1954 in the modern day films. So yeah, I love that roar. And I just love the design of Godzilla and what he represents and all that. So yeah, Godzilla's my boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of
fucking calm.
And interesting how, again, like I suppose in the old movies, he always was like this villain, and it's interesting in the new ones, he almost becomes like a hero almost. And I think in that 2014 film, he very much turns up like, and at the end of it, they are like, "Hey, Godzilla, he saved us."
Yeah,
etc.
That's what I love the most about that film. Is throughout all of it, you're like, "Oh my God, the untold destruction! Oh, the humanity!" And then at the end, everyone's just like, "Yay!"
But I think, like, the new films, in a way, like, people always say, "Oh, the human stuff is awful," like, and I'm just like, well, it's kind of getting that spirit of the old films in a way, like, it's just like nobody cares about the human elements, and it's very, like, not well written, but that's not the point of these films in a way. So that's why I appreciate the new films on what they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's why I like, I think with Godzilla 2014, like, it has a lot of like great moments. I think like when he's walking around like in Hawaii and stuff, you get a lot of like sense of scale for Godzilla. You very much like that scene where they're like parachuting and you have like the sort of 2001 Space Odyssey music when they're like the red flares. That looks amazing. And yeah, and like you said, the fact that he's got the breath, the atomic breath, that comes through, and the fact that he's got the same roar, it's all like really impactful. And there's a lot of throwback to like the original films. Like, so again, like I said earlier, the fact that you have Ishiro Serizawa is named after the director of the original film, Ishiro Honda, and Dr. Dasaku Shirazawa, who's then one of the main characters of that film. So they're sort of like honoring it in that way. The fact that Ken Watanabe, who plays him, wanted to say the Japanese name of Gojira as well. So, there's still a lot of kind of appreciation for the roots in that sense. I think for me, Godzilla King of the Monsters does a good job as well of honoring it. And I think, like you said, Jake, I think some people are too harsh on this film because I think it very much knows what it is. It is kind of like a disaster movie in many ways, but also it does pay homage to that background in a lot of ways. I have a lot of respect for Michael Dougherty, who directed it, because you could tell that he kind of went back and like looked at the lore and looked at all of the old films. I enjoyed Godzilla versus Kong for what it was, but I don't think there was as much of a love for the franchise as there was with King of the Monsters. I think, Michael Dougherty, he had like a writing credit for like X2. He's done like Trick or Treat. I think that he's got like a good, legacy within movies. And the stuff that he did in King of the Monsters, I think, was just a good, representation of how to adapt and pay homage to the past. So Mothra, for example, like Mothra's theme in King of the Monsters is the classic Mothra theme in the old movies. And you got like Rodan, obviously, which he had his own movie at some point as well, but he was mainly known for being in the Godzilla movies. They kept to his kind of traditional design. Godzilla gets his own theme again, they're like dun dun dun, and the fact that you even have in that movie the Blue Oyster Cult song gets like an adaptation, which like apparently was the first time that had ever been actually like used and played in a film. The Godzilla one. So whereas for the King of the Monsters, it was adapted, I think, by Bear McCreary. So it knows where it is. It's a load of fun, and the references are just great, and I think Michael Dougherty just understood that. There's things like when they go to the underwater temple, there's like a skeleton that looks like Aniguirus, which is the dinosaur I mentioned earlier. And, when they're talking about like Ghidorah and stuff like that, they're referencing as Monster Zero. And so there's like, referencing that film that I mentioned there about, the invasion of Astro Monster. They very much play up like the personalities of the heads, which is why on today's Zencast I'm called Dorton, because apparently the meme worthy Ghidorah memes you have of the different heads and their different personalities. According to Dougherty, the center head is called Lyles. The left one is called Daunton, which is the one that everyone kind of like enjoys and makes fun of because he's the playful, curious one who's like really dumb. And then the right head is Maxon, who is meant to be the more aggressive of the three. But apparently on set, they were like more referred to as their sort of like Japanese names they give them, which was Ichi, Ni, and San, which is essentially middle, right, and left. But then San, which is Dalton, essentially, is given the nickname of Kevin, which is like a lot within the fan base of like Ni, Ichi, and Kevin. There's even a meme which I enjoy, which is this one is like named them slightly differently, but it's got Miji, Japanese for right, Anufa, Japanese for alpha, and then Kevin, just Kevin. So, there's that classic one of the cartoons, and like he's the one with like the goofy face and that kind of stuff. And it's just that kind of stuff which you can pull away from it. And you watch the film and you're like, it's right. Like, because he is like a bit goofy in it. He's got this like weird goofy face sometimes where he looks at the other ones and the other ones are angry. And it's just fun when a blockbuster cannot take itself too seriously like that and have fun with it. And I think that that's what King of the Monsters does, is that it has Rodan, it has Mothra, it has, Ghidorah. It has fun with all of those monsters. It gives them personalities. It gives them their own like visuals and their own environments. Rodan is there in like the sort of South American city, and he's there with the visual of the volcano and everything like that. Ghidorah has all the lightning and everything. Mothra is like in the rainforest and has like her own powers and stuff like that. I think it's just good that they sort of like focused and they didn't do a kind of Transformers of like, let's just throw them all in there and it's just this big CGI mess. I think it really came out, and I think even in Godzilla, the character, you saw his progress within that film. And he comes out on top. He comes out ready for Godzilla versus Kong, like, yeah, I am the king of the monsters.
And then Godzilla versus Kong kind of ended in a draw.
Yeah, and the start of the film, they were just like kind of building up the like, oh, he defeated him. I'm like, are they all dead? I hope not.
That film as well. Now, I had an absolute blast with Godzilla versus Kong, and I when I remember when cinemas reopened, that was one of the first ones I wanted to see in the big screen.
Yeah,
for me, that deserved the cinematic experience. And I think it might be my favorite of the new bunch, just because of how stupid it is. And it is just a big lizard versus a big monkey. And the film, I like to call it's Godzilla versus Kong, and then what happened is because things just happen in that movie. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember watching the film, and then Kong's on a ship. How did that happen? It just happens.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, Godzilla ends up in Tokyo smashing the wall. It's just go along with it. Like, it's happening. So yeah,
it's big dumb fun.
It's big dumb fun, and it's for me, it's the franchise along with Fast and Furious, where I'm just going in to have a blast with the ridiculousness of it all.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yes, this I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed this episode.
Yes, I did too. It was fun.
It was fun for our first go at this, and we will be doing more. We're going to be coming back every 2 months. Will we be talking about the same things, or will we be talking about something else? Dave, I think you'll still be going through those Godzilla movies with the amount they made.
I don't think I can top like aliens using cancer as a way of stealing Earth's like kaiju, so
no, I don't think
potentially maybe once I get to one of the other eras, maybe, because I know that the Godzilla franchise goes to some crazy places and being like, oh, you think Godzilla's faced something before with Mothra? Well, what about Destroyer? Or, like these crazy things that he starts fighting in the 90s, which are just pure, like, fights. That's all they are. There's nothing else to them.
Okay, but who would win in a fight between Godzilla and Goku?
Oh, not this again.
What do you mean this again? I don't think this has ever come up.
It's Goku versus anything has always come up.
Yeah, it even came up in my true crime document podcast the other day.
Oh.
I was like, oh, what's Goku doing here?
To be fair, I don't think there would be much of like evidence left after Goku is just like obliterated
them. Yeah, just ashes and ashes. Right, so let's get out of here then. We thank you all for listening to this episode. Appreciate people coming on board, listening to us geek out, speculate, but in this case, get really, really geeky into the stuff we're nerding out about at the minute. So next week, we're actually going to be doing a romance in superheroes episode. It is Valentine's week, so we're going to be talking about how romance fits with superheroes, how it, and our favorite couples as well. So that should be quite fun. But guys, where can the people find you, and what are you getting up to?
You can find me on Twitter at Comic Book Shogun, where I just talk shit all the time. And you can find me on Letterboxd occasionally doing things at TGAPS,
something like that.
Tell you what, find me via Jake's profile that he'll tell you about shortly. But Twitter, go to Twitter.
Go to Twits.
For myself, you can catch me at Twitter at David Oscar, OSGAR. You can also catch me on Letterboxd. And just keep an eye out for some new projects, hopefully in the new year. Obviously, very busy at the moment. You can also catch me on Well Good Movies. We've had quite a good format change at the moment where we're talking about one specific movie every episode. So that comes out every 2 weeks. And every episode kind of like leads on to the next one in terms of what movie we choose for that episode. So we've recently talked about The Room, which is a famous bad movie, and that has led us to Sherlock Holmes from 2009 somehow. But from Sherlock Holmes 2009, we'll kind of have this theme of then like having something like related in some way tenuously to the last one, and the way that we choose the film is like based on our like end games, etc. So yeah, it's a fun time. Go check it out. And it's a great way to like watch along with the podcast because you can always know then what we're going to be talking in the next episode about. So you can go watch it at home yourself and then join in with the conversation on the next one. And till then, I'll be hanging around with my my friends Itchy and Knee, like with the two other heads on my body.
So you better be nice about the 2009 Sherlock Holmes film. I actually quite like it. Game of Shadows, not so much, but it has Jared Harris in it, and I love Jared Harris. So.
I did not kill her. I did not.
You're tearing me apart, Dave.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Yeah, well, check out the Sherlock Holmes episode because we've also got regular on this show, Rob Ailing joins us, which was a joy to have.
What?
That's cheating on us.
A surprise there. So, you can also find me in all the same spots on Twitter at Sweaty Jake, just geeking out and nerding out, and on Letterboxd at JCart, where you can catch all my ratings and see what I'm getting up to, my viewings. The show, you can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Capes, Cows, Masks. And you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts. Subscribe and follow us on there. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, leave us a rating and a review. It all helps us go up in the ranking. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.